Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Fan Behavior. I am Zoe, and today I am unfortunately not joined by Hannah. She's on vacation, but I am joined by the lovely Caroline. Caroline, thank you so much for filling in as the co-host and being here to discuss this absolutely incredible, crazy race that we just had.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. It's so much fun to be here. I love being a part of a podcast, even for just a little time, a little bit of time. And I love you guys. Big Hannah fan, big Zoe fan. So
You're so
thrilled to be
nice.
here.
Thank you so much. I know I'm sad that Hannah can't be here to join in on the fun with all of us. I was actually trying to remember. I was like, when did I first meet Caroline? And it
OMG.
brought me back to when you were so kind, and it was Austin 2022, and
hmm
you were so generous to take a picture of me and Hannah's seats. You were like, this is your
Oh
view
yeah. Yeah, that's
from the
right.
track. And I was like, this Caroline girl, she is so nice. So that was
Oh,
a nice little memory that I had thinking of you. And we saw each other last year at Austin as well. Um,
yes.
which was
Full circle
fun.
moment, honestly, because was Austin 2022, was that your first F1 race?
Yes.
Okay,
Was it
because it was
yours?
my first like in-person race too. And so we were there that I think it was Thursday during media day because we saw Daniel and Lando back when Danny was at
Oh,
McLaren.
yes.
TBT.
Yes.
And I looking back on it, knowing what we know now of Coda, I promise you, it was not as nice as maybe it seemed in the moment because you told me where your seats were. And I had this thought when I had offered, I was like, oh my gosh, what if she's like across the
Oh,
entire circuit and I am about to walk the length of the track to show them where their seats were. But ironically, it was in the grandstand that I was in, so it worked out.
it was perfect. It was so kind of you. So sweet. And we've been wanting to get you on the podcast for a while. Life happens, chaos happens. I'm glad
Yeah.
that you're here for this particular race because it was chaotic.
hmm
There's a lot to discuss. As
hmm
people know who listen to our show, I was gone this weekend at a bachelorette trip. And so I was having to like sneak away to watch qualifying. I was hiding in my room Sunday morning watching a majority of the race. Then I had to go out to like help everybody clean up the Airbnb before we
Oh my
left.
gosh.
But I was managing to, I was like, Charlotte Claire, maybe he's about to win this race. Like, I'm sorry, I have to, I have to go away for
Yes.
a little while. So I did my best to stay up to date with all the things. You'll have to help me if I forget something or don't, forget to mention something. Please
Yeah,
chime
sure.
in, because there's just a lot to cover. And I think as people know, if you are not super locked into every single facet of the weekend, like there's things you're going to miss. There's things you're
For
not going
sure.
to fully get to. But let's start with prior to the race weekend. The big news that Logan Sargent is replaced at Williams. What were
Mhm.
your initial thoughts were you surprised? Were you not surprised? How'd you feel about the news?
I wasn't necessarily surprised. I think anybody across the globe that said they were surprised is lying.
Yeah,
If we're being totally honest, I think he's a wonderful person, and I do think he's a talented driver. I just don't think it ever really clicked into place or locked into place for him.
I
And
agree.
so I just the it's so random. When I saw the announcement, it was like eagle screech dying was like the sound in my mind. I was like, oh no, not like right before two American races.
I know.
Huge bummer. But honestly, I think it could have been just a rumor that I saw, but I feel like he'll do well in IndyCar.
I completely agree. I've seen that too, that there's talks of him joining IndyCar next year. I just think not I hate the idea that, oh, if you're American, IndyCar is where you're best suited. Of course, I would love to see more American
hmm
drivers in Formula One, but I just feel like, as you said, he was never really set up to succeed at
hmm
Williams. He was just always kind of on the back foot, and I felt like he was just constantly playing catch up.
hmm
And it just I was surprised it happened when it happened, just because it seemed like I have a feeling it was that crash, that FP3 crash, that sort of was the
hmm
catalyst. But I also feel like, why didn't they just make the change during the summer break? It would have seemed a little bit more like seamless. I don't know.
Yeah.
But
And
Anyway,
then
James
Alex
Vowles.
Albon's post about like, I'll keep things behind closed doors, behind closed doors. I'm like, Alex, what do you know?
Alex has a lot of things
What
that
do you
he's,
know?
yeah. And then I think what was even more shocking to me was who they chose to replace him with.
Hmm.
Um, which is Franco Colapinto, who's an F2 driver, a rookie F2 driver. And I think a lot of people felt like, okay, I can understand you replacing Logan with maybe someone who's had F1 experience because you don't want there to be crashes, whatever.
Sure,
But then
sure.
to replace him by with a rookie, it's sort of like, oh, well, this is also quite a big risk that
Yeah.
Williams is choosing to go with somebody who's pretty inexperienced. So again, a lot of things happen behind closed doors that we don't know about. And I think they did try to get more experienced drivers. It just didn't end up working out. But as we'll get to,
Hmm.
Franco did well, like had a pretty good
Yeah, he made up what, like
weekend.
six places or something? He did pretty
Yes,
well.
he did
And
well.
question, what was Liam Lawson doing? Because I think that we all expected Liam to be that replacement.
I read that that was James's first choice, but that like Helmut Marco and Red Bull were worried that if Red Bull themselves decide to make some sort of change mid-season, that Liam is not available. That was sort of what I inferred from it. Like they wanted to
Mm.
retain Liam should they need him during the season. And I think there was fear
Mm.
that they wouldn't be able to get him back because Williams wanted someone consistent. They wanted to have someone for the next
Sure, sure,
chunk of
sure.
races. So that's also kind of an interesting wrinkle. Um, yeah, that's
But I
something
feel like they totally could have worked out some kind of temporary, like they do with reserve drivers that are like on loan to other teams. I'm like,
I know.
okay. But I
I
feel
know.
like you could write up something that's like, we have priority if we decide to change our minds.
I know. I don't know. I don't know. But we'll have to wait
They
and
should
see
put
how
us
that
in the
turns
room,
out.
Zoe. They really should put us in the room.
Get us in the room to really figure it
We'll
all
be
out.
cutting deals.
Exactly, exactly. So best of luck to Logan and his future endeavors.
Mhm.
Looking forward to seeing him in other racing series. And it just adds another layer to what has been a very crazy, chaotic F1 season. It's just like another thing that is
Yes.
interesting.
Yes. Like I feel like in the last couple of years we've just had little nugget moments that
Hmm.
we're clinging to for the season. And I feel like
Hmm.
every race we've had something. I mean, it's almost to the point where we're like jittery overloaded on all of this excitement. We're like, there's too much great things happening.
Exactly. It's like what else is coming for us? 'Cause it
Yeah.
feels like every weekend there's just some new wrinkle to what's going on. Speaking
Hmm.
of, so we heard going into this weekend, Kimi Antonelli was going to be doing an FP1 session with Merck. Obviously, a lot of rumors, basically not confirmed but unconfirmed, that he was going to be announced as the Merck driver this weekend. He gets into FP1 and he crashes. And
Yeah.
I do think there were a lot of people who totally overreacted to the crash and were like, oh my God.
Yeah.
In my mind, I'm like, this is what happens when you when you put someone who has a lot of potential but is still very young in a
Hmm.
Formula One car. It doesn't mean he's not fast. It doesn't mean he's not capable. It doesn't mean he doesn't have a super incredible future ahead of him. He's just pretty raw. Like
Hmm.
that's the truth of it. And brave of him to like go out there and actually put together some fast laps, and he could have very easily just like kept it safe,
Hmm.
but he wanted to prove his speed. So
Yeah.
I didn't feel like it was detrimental. Obviously, he then got announced as the Merc driver, but I felt like some people were like, "Oh my God, is this going to make them change their minds?" And I was like, "I
Yeah,
don't
I
think
don't
so."
think so. I feel like the adrenaline was pumping for sure because he knew that he had signed that contract for the
Right,
next year. So I think
right.
he came into it being like, this is my chance. This is my debut. This is the first time the F1 fans are seeing me. And so he wanted to push it to the limit. And in his defense, a lot of the drivers were struggling at the same corner that he crashed on. And
Yep.
these are, veteran experienced drivers. And so I actually felt like Toto said it well. He was like, "We have the problem now of telling our driver to slow down," which I think is a problem any team principal would be lucky to have. And so, is it a bummer he crashed? For sure. I'm so glad he's okay. But I don't think it's necessarily indicative of everything we're going to see next year. I think he's just got to learn the car.
I completely agree. And also, if you go back to Max's early years with Red Bull. Max crashed a
Hmm.
lot too and had a lot of situations where he was like pushing on the limit and trying to find
Hmm.
that limit. And yeah, it caused some carnage. Like
Hmm.
he, they definitely had to repair a few cars back in that time, but look at Max now,
Yeah.
almost, well, maybe going to be a four-time world champion. We'll have to wait and see how the rest of the season shakes out.
Yeah.
So happy for Kimi. I'm really looking forward to next season with so many rookies on the grid, drivers changing teams. I feel like because we got no changes this year, I'm just
Hmm.
like, oh my God, this is going to be so interesting to see how this all plays out next season.
It's almost one of those like I'll believe it when I see it things because I don't like I just can't picture Carlos
I
in
know.
blue
I
and white.
know.
I'm like, wait,
And
I
Lewis at
really want to
Ferrari.
see it. Yes. And like Lewis, I honestly, Lewis looks good and everything. So like, whatever. But I don't know. It's one of those I'll believe it when I see it things. And also, yay. So exciting to see so much mix up and change up things. Also, last thing, not to circle back, but
Please.
I believe that it was either last year or the year before, Monza actually moved that gravel trap closer in. And so I was thinking about, I was like, that's where Kimmy kind of like caught the edge and then went off. And I mean, he hasn't had a ton of experience with that new gravel
Right.
trap anyway. So like I feel like he gets all the absolution. But back to next year, I think it will be very interesting. Okay, and this is probably a question we're going to get to later. I haven't seen the questions, but do you think we're going to see a change at Red Bull next year?
That's such a good question. I mean, Hannah and I have talked about it. Like we've basically talked about it in every which way. Like we've, gone over it 1,000 times. I honestly, yes, I think there will be a change. I'm not sure where it's going to be, but I
Mm-hmm.
think it will not be the four that are there right now. I think it will change
Mm-hmm.
to some degree. I just don't know how.
Mm-hmm.
That's kind of all I can really like. I don't feel I feel like I can't predict it. Like I
Yeah.
can't really read the tea leaves on what's going on there. And it feels like, especially Red Bull and the senior team, I mean, the car, and we'll get to all of that stuff, but like
Oh yeah.
they have big problems they're trying to figure out. You know what
Yeah.
I mean? So
Yeah.
I feel like they just have a lot of stuff that they're needing to work through right now. I don't know. How about you? What do you
I
think?
mean, I think that Red Bull has more problems than they have people to handle said problems right now. And it started at the very beginning of the year because some of the problems are of their own making and some of them are not. And
Right.
so it's been a real unfortunate situation. I think morale is really struggling at Red Bull, which can be one of the biggest hurters, I guess, most detrimental things to a team. And so I think that if Christian Horner had it his way, there would be some changes in the Red Bull team next year. I think Checo brings in a lot of money. I think he's really good for morale. I think he's really good for the organization as a whole, and they
Yeah.
know what they're getting with Checo. But I also know they have development drivers that have been
Right.
working really hard to get there. So,
Right.
like, I want to see Liam Lawson in the seat personally. So,
Yeah. I know. It's very, yeah. Like I feel like at this point, you could tell me a number of different things. Like if someone from the future came to us and was like, this is what the Red Bull lineups look like next year, I'd be like, okay, like that makes
believe
sense.
it.
Like, you know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
I just don't, I can't really see it from right now, but I mean, I'm sure we'll figure out in the coming
Yeah.
weeks and stuff. So
Yeah,
that will
because
be
Williams was not the one we were expecting to have a mid-season change, were they?
right.
It was Red Bull we were expecting.
Well, and I don't even know if we were expecting it. I guess it was just like all the chatter was around
Mm-hmm.
that.
Mm-hmm.
So we'll have to wait and see. I don't know. It's crazy. I kind of feel like Red Bull is sort of in a situation right now with their car and just kind of like scratching their heads like Merck was back in 2022 when
Mm-hmm.
they was just like all of a sudden they had this car that they just were so confused like wait, well, how is this not working? And
Mm-hmm.
I'm not used to it not being good anymore or as good as it once was. And I just feel like they're all kind of scratching their heads like I don't know where it's gone wrong for us.
Mm-hmm.
So the whole Red Bull thing just in general will be fascinating to watch in the coming races.
Agreed.
Um, okay, should we get to the race, the actual weekend
Let's
itself?
chat it.
Okay, so qualifying. Um, the biggest thing obviously was how badly, and I say badly, and I mean, it's all relative, right? But for
Mm.
Red Bull standards, how badly they were in
Yeah.
qualifying, and seeing Max, especially because, Max Checo has been very vocal about the struggles of the car for a while. And Max, I think, has been kind of like, he's also had struggles with it, but he still has like managed to get decent qualifying performance out of it.
Hmm.
But it seemed like this weekend, they both just were completely confused as to why they were not qualifying better.
Yeah. Yeah. I think I spoke with somebody about it over the summer break, just asking, if Red Bull has this thing clinched or not. And I've thought it all summer. It's going to depend on how they come back in this second half. And I feel like they've not come back as strong as maybe they would have wanted to. And you've just kind of seen this slow decline in the car over the course of the year. And I wish I could like wave my magic wand and know what was wrong. But
So
I
do
think
they.
that, yeah. I mean, the best quote was from Max after the race where he was like, everything needs to be changed. The whole car, everything. I was like, all right.
Start over. Start over. Yeah, it was just very bizarre seeing how much they were struggling. And we talked about this during the Dutch GP recap, kind of like,
Hmm.
okay, is the drivers' championship, is it really, is there a chance that Lando could win? And at the
Hmm.
time, I was kind of like, yes, there's a chance. But up until that point, even though the car was struggling, Max was still qualifying like in the top three. He was still getting on the podium. It was like, it's hard to imagine uh Lando being able to win when Max is still able to pull out those kinds of performances. But now this
Hmm.
weekend, with Max qualifying, because what did he end up in, sixth or
Hmm.
seventh? I'm not even
Hmm.
sure.
I think he ended up sixth.
Uh, it's kind of like, oh, okay, now there's like a real chance if these types of performances keep happening at other tracks. Yeah, it could happen, and we'll get to the
Yeah.
McLaren of it all. But that was a surprising thing for me. I also was really surprised. I've been kind of surprised with how I feel like backwards both Aston Martin and the V carbs have gotten, especially in qualifying.
Yes.
I feel like Yuki gets out in Q1. Um, Lance, I think, also got out in Q1
Mm-hmm.
too.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I just feel like they've just kind of like taken a lot of steps back.
I said this to my husband when we were
Okay.
watching qualifying. I was like, remember when the Aston Martins were the only ones that could challenge Red Bull? Like,
Mm-hmm.
what
Mm-hmm.
happened? I don't understand. And you ask yourself, is it that everybody else just caught up or that they stopped or that they've regressed? Which I don't know the answer to that question. I think that the V carbs were doing really, really well. And challenging the Red Bulls themselves. And then everyone was like, whoa, they're coming for Red Bull. And then I have no proof of this, but like if I was
Just
Red Bull,
theories.
I would be like, hey, second team, cool it because you're the second team.
Yeah.
But I mean, again, no proof. We're not in the room. We should be in the room. We've got great ideas. But no, I'm just kidding. But yeah, I don't know what the deal is there. And with Aston Martin, I feel like it's the age-old question. Does it mean they need to replace Lance to see some improvement? I don't know.
I don't know. I mean, we've said this like over the course of the season that Lance, in my opinion, I think has done pretty well this season in terms of his performance against Alonso. I feel like they're consistently going back and forth as to who is the better driver each weekend. Sometimes it's Fernando, sometimes it's Lance. It hasn't been as glaring, like, oh, Lance is really struggling as it maybe has been in past seasons. Um, but I don't know. I've also heard people talk about how any team that Fernando goes to, they start to like decline, like the car development gets worse.
Ooh.
And I think
Hot take.
Fernando has kind of said as much too. Like he has talked about how he will kind of drive through problems, and maybe he's not as sensitive to car issues or things that need to be fixed as
Yeah.
other drivers are. And so he sort of I guess his point was like he makes bad cars work, whereas maybe that's
Yeah.
not always a positive. Sometimes you actually
Yeah,
have to
that
be
makes
like, this
sense.
isn't working well and we need to change it. So I don't know, just something I kind of noticed. Though both, I guess, in defense of both Aston Martin and V Carb, like Fernando was like, I think like 7 thousandths of a second away from Q3. And I think Daniel was also like 10,000. Were both very,
It
very,
was
very close to
super
making it into
close.
Q3. So like,
Mhm.
okay, like I guess it's not all terrible for them, but it
Mhm,
just was something I
mhm.
was thinking about like, oh wow, they've kind of pulled back. And then the other thing I was going to say is that once again, I feel like Nico Hulkenberg is kind of the king of qualifying. Like, he just always
Mm,
outperforms in quality, and so does Alex. I just feel like they both do
yeah.
really, really well in those situations.
Yeah, it's interesting because there's the fantasy leagues that my husband and I are a part of, and so we'll try to set our lineups and everything. And I'm always so tempted to pick Nico, who actually has done pretty well in the
He
drivers'
has.
championship this year.
He
But I'm
has.
always so tempted to pick him. But then I'm like, but he does so much better in qualifying than he does in the race.
Yep.
And was it him that was getting all the time penalties? No, it was
Him
Daniel.
him and Daniel, they both
Oh,
got time
I
penalties. Yeah.
almost said something about like Daniel's the new Esteban up in here with these penalties. Oh my
I know
gosh.
when this is jumping ahead to the race, but when that
Yeah, sorry.
mechanic touched that wing, I was just like, oh no.
It was like you could see it,
Yeah,
he
he pulled
paused with
back.
his hand on
Yes.
it and he was like, "Did I really just do that? Surely I didn't. Maybe if I pull it back really quickly, no one will have seen it. Maybe if I just pull it back really quickly."
I know it's like, and I totally, there were a lot of people who were like, how could you do that? But it's like muscle memory. That's what they
It
do every
is.
single time. So I can understand, but also it sucks because that
Yeah,
didn't actually end up affecting like anything at all, but it still cost them 10 seconds, which
for
is
sure.
unfortunate. Um,
Yeah.
but yeah, I feel like Nico has always kind of managed to outperform the Haas's capabilities, at least in terms of one lap pace. Like he always
Mhm.
gets it in a good position to start the race, which I think has led him to getting good points and kind of
Yeah.
maximizing what the Haas can do. So props to him. And they have pretty good, I feel like both Haas and Williams have really good straight line speed, which obviously helped them a
Yes.
lot in Monza.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think that the development at Williams is going in the right direction. And so I'm hopeful with Carlos there that they'll just
Keep going up.
keep moving up. Yeah.
Yeah. And then obviously, the big story was that Lando gets on pole, Oscar qualifies P2. And
Mm-hmm.
I think a lot of us were kind of like, okay, you know, with Max and Checo starting further back on the grid, you've got Lando and Oscar. It's putting McLaren in a great position for the Constructors' Championship,
Yeah.
obviously, and then Lando's chances in the Drivers' Championship because
Yeah.
if they finished the race where they started the race, Lando would net quite a few more points than
Sure,
Max.
sure.
Didn't end up being the case, which we'll get to. Um, but I feel like this qualifying especially was just kind of confirmation. I've always felt this way, or at least the last handful of weeks, but it's like, okay, there's no debating it. McLaren is officially the fastest car,
Yeah.
clear cut. They are the fastest car right now. And it feels like, especially in qualifying, no one can really touch
Yeah.
them.
And good on them for that
Good on
because they've
them.
had some struggles. I mean, if you think back
Yes.
to the very beginning of last year, that was not that
Yes.
long ago when Lando had to stop like 5 times in the
Hmm.
first race of the season.
Yes.
And I thought to myself, are we seeing the downfall of McLaren? Are they going to be like back at the grid forever? And they picked up their drawers and they
Yep.
got out there.
They figured it out. They
Yeah,
really
they did.
figured it out. And I think it's made it really interesting. I think the fact that they have two very strong drivers who perform well, bring out the best of each other. Again, like we'll get to the driver situation there, but I just feel like it's cool to see them actually be able to not just be like one off, oh, we're the fastest, maybe like one race a season, but
Mhm.
actually get into a position where no, like they are the fastest and they can
Consistent.
contend every single weekend no matter
Hmm.
what.
Hmm.
Anything else from qualifying that you wanted to discuss or any moments you wanted to touch on?
I have to tip my hat to the Mercedes and the Ferraris as well. Like they're hanging in there. And Mercedes has seen some serious growth.
Yeah,
And somebody asked me recently about Lewis if he's going to start kind of taking the back foot now that he's going to Ferrari next year. And I'm like, no, I feel like he's really stayed pedal to the metal, especially in qualifying. So that was pretty
they
much
did
it for
well.
me. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, let's get to the race because this is when chaos
Ooh.
begins. So I think I'm not really sure if we want to save the papaya rules conversation for later, if we want to get into it right now, because I feel
Mm.
like the race starts out obviously with Oscar pretty much immediately taking
Yeah,
the
let's start lap
spot,
one. Yeah. Lap one.
making a very impressive, risky move, but clean move on
Mhm.
Lando to take the lead of the race. Charles Leclerc as well makes a pretty
Yeah.
impressive move on Lando to get into second. What
Yeah.
were your thoughts on Oscar
Yeah.
making that move and taking the first spot in lap one?
Yeah. So I knew from the time the lights went out that Oscar was not there to play because
Oh,
he
yeah.
made a really aggressive move on George as well going into that first corner. And I saw this hilarious meme that was like Lando thought he survived turn one, gets to turn six, and then gets overtaken. I am I mean, not so secret Oscar fan.
Me as
I don't,
well.
yeah, I'm not out here like screaming from the rooftops. I love Oscar, but if I had to pick a favorite driver, I probably would choose him. Just because I think his driving style is so great and he's consistent as a person on and off the track. I just feel like he is safe in every sense of the word, while also being an incredible driver and an incredible racer. I don't fault him at all for
Same.
taking the lead from Lando because at no point was it ever communicated that Lando was driver one and Oscar was driver two. I think we all just assumed that because Lando's been there for so long that he would be the one that receives preferential treatment. But that has never actually been communicated. And I suspect because we saw it a little bit in Hungary when Oscar got Lando in Hungary and then suddenly like the strategy changed. I almost wonder if there's maybe some kind of, I don't know what papaya rules is, but there's some kind of understanding where the preference is given to the driver with race position.
Hmm.
And so Oscar knows that. So he's going to do everything he can to get said race position. And I don't think it's right of Lando to expect his teammate to not challenge him because you know what I mean? I mean, you're right. You're out there to race.
Yes. So Zach Brown defined papaya rules as basically you raced your teammate hard and fair, basically showing your teammate respect on the track, which that sounds great.
Yeah.
That's
Okay.
a good
Vague.
that's a good like I don't know. I feel like every team strives for that. It doesn't mean it always ends up working out. I think let's just have the conversation now about because
Let's do
there's been a
it.
lot of talk about there's a camp of people that feel like right now, and I don't know the exact, I should look this up. I don't know the exact spread between Lando and Max in the drivers' championships.
I know
Um,
prior to Monza, it was like 70 points.
yeah, so I think it's like 62 or something
Yeah.
like that. I can pull it up while we're talking. So um there's a group of people who feel like this might be Lando slash McLaren's chance to win a driver's championship. These chances don't come around very often. Your opportunity to win a championship may come around one time,
Mhm.
and you have to do everything you can and with the help of your team to capitalize.
Mhm.
I understand that. I also understand from an Oscar perspective, which is like you want to win every race you compete in, and if parameters aren't put in place and rules aren't stated ahead of time or a plan isn't put in place ahead of time, of course you're going to do whatever you can to win the race and beat your teammate and all those things. I kind of feel like McLaren has been caught a little bit like on the back foot, and also I think they kind of are surprised that they are in a fight for the drivers championship. I don't
Mhm.
know that they really believed, probably up until honestly last week, that they actually could win the championship.
I agree.
because I feel like this was kind of a conversation back in Hungary when Oscar won, and sort of is McLaren going to make Lando change because Lando's closest to Max in the championship, so should they let him win in order to close that gap? I feel like at that time they didn't really believe that Max was going, or that they were able to compete with Max, and so they obviously made the switch, and Oscar ended up winning that race. I feel like now, because the gap has closed so much, they're kind of like, oh, shoot, we actually now need to start sort of establishing a driver one, driver two situation in order to get ourselves in a position to potentially compete with Max if the Red Bull continues to be struggling as much as it has been struggling. Because
Mm-hmm.
as we know, too, like championships can come down to 1 point. It could be a
Mm-hmm.
1 point difference that gives you a championship or loses you a championship. And so every point does matter. I Yeah, so I think there's some people who feel like McLaren need to do everything in their power, even if that means swapping positions, even if that means um Oscar being more of like a rear gunner for, because if Oscar has sort of maintained position, Charles Leclerc would have stayed behind Oscar, and like that could have been the difference between Charles Leclerc winning Monza and Lando winning Monza. Like, you know what I
Ooh.
mean? Like those types of
Sort of,
things
yeah.
could happen.
I actually think that it was Lando's fault for losing the lead because he was on the back foot and Oscar got him. And I think that Oscar should have won Monza. I'm not upset that Oscar won in Monza or that Charles won in Monza.
Yeah.
Super thrilled for Charles. But actually, when Oscar got Lando and then they started all this undercutting, pitting started happening.
Yep.
The second pit stop, when Charles pit, Lando pit, or like one of them pitted and it triggered the other. And I looked at my husband and I said, they need to pit Oscar. They
Hmm.
need to pit Oscar. They're waiting too long to pit him. They're waiting too long. They're waiting too long. They're waiting too long. And they waited too long to pit him the second time, which put him too far behind Charles, which is why he ended up not being able to catch him in the end. I'll believe that till the day I die. But I feel like, as far as the conversation about whether or not they should be prioritizing Lando for the sake of the Drivers' Championship, I, this is just my gut that's telling me this, and no proof, pure gut. I think that Lando's going to catch him with or without Oscar's help. And I don't think any driver wants to win knowing that their teammate helped them get there. You know what I mean? They're all racers. They all want to win.
Yes, yes. I think, and that's kind of what, sorry, I'm just looking up. So the gap right now is 62 points between Max
Hmm.
and Lando. That's kind of what Lando said after the race, was basically like, I don't want to be in a position where I have to swap drivers.
Hmm.
And to your point about like Lando also needs to prove himself that he can be in these types of situations, get pole position and maintain pole position.
Hmm.
And I think he would admit this, like he has made some mistakes over the course of the last few months that have cost him race victories or have cost him positions that were to no fault of anybody else but his own.
Hmm.
And I think in order to be a world champion driver, like you have to clean up those parts of your racing in order to
Yeah.
really be in contention. So it'll just be and so I guess my point to all of this, I feel like most people, they're like team Oscar or team Lando. I feel very much somewhere in the middle because I like both of the drivers a lot, and I
Hmm.
don't really feel I understand like both arguments.
Hmm.
Because it will be really interesting if Max wins by a couple of points. Like that, people will be
Yeah.
looking back and saying, look at all these chances when you could have made changes and you didn't, right?
Sure.
But that's obviously, you can't always look back in hindsight, and because but I just think it'll be really fascinating to see what happens for the rest of the season, and maybe this is a situation for McLaren going forward where they have to establish rules, or because I understand not wanting to have like driver one, driver two, but when you do have driver one, driver two, it does make things a little bit easier. And we've seen in the
Hmm.
past with Lewis and Valtteri, Max and Checo, like having that kind
Hmm.
of clear um driver one, driver two, it does make a difference. It does help. And maybe McLaren going forward need to kind of be in a position where it's like, okay, the driver that's in the lead by the summer break, like the driver that has more points by the summer break, that's the driver that gets the driver one standings for like the remaining races. Like we'll allow you to race how you want to race up until that point, but then that's going to decide how we move forward in the second half. I don't know. I'm just like, they're going to have to
Yeah,
establish some kind of thing if they, because as we know, like having two number one drivers is probably not going to be, it's probably not going to lead to either one of them being able to win a championship.
that's true. And I do think it's hard to say whoever has the most points going into the summer gets preferential treatment just because at least at McLaren, I know they've been giving Lando upgrades before they've been giving Oscar upgrades, which has given Lando a bit of a head start on Oscar in some ways with the car. And so I feel like that's hard. I actually think that McLaren's going to end up with more like a Lewis Hamilton, Nico Rosberg
I know
situation next
that
year.
that's I think, and we've said this too. Like that's where I think this is heading, which as we
Yeah.
see, like is not that's not sustainable. Like that just it doesn't work for a long term situation,
Mm-hmm.
and it just it can really blow up in a team's face.
Yeah. Yeah.
So we'll have to wait and see.
We'll have to see. I actually think Fred has done a really good job of it over at Ferrari because before him coming on, Charles was clearly the driver one, and then everybody was just kind of assuming that that was the regime and how it was going to stay. And Fred came when he came in, he said, "There's no driver one here at Ferrari. We support the driver that's doing the best." And I actually think in that way, it's been really, really good for Carlos and Charles's on track relationship with each other as well. So
Yeah.
take notes, McLaren.
I also think, I mean, sort of, I think it's been nice at least that Ferrari haven't had to really be like racing each other. It feels like
That's true.
each weekend it's like one driver is outperforming the other, that it's clear enough. It's like, okay, well, this weekend so and so is the better driver or the driver that's performing better. So it's just tough when you have both of the drivers like right by each other. It just
Hmm.
causes problems. I don't know, which has
Hmm.
gotten to be interesting. Lewis and Charles Leclerc next season, like
Yes, it is.
how's that going to shake out? Because that's a situation where both drivers view themselves as the number one driver, and
For sure.
will that cause problems? We'll have to wait and see. I wanted to go back to the start of the race,
Yeah.
because so we had Daniel getting the 5 second penalty for forcing Nico off of the track, which then
Hmm.
causes Nico to kind of go back. Nico then gets a 10 second penalty for running into Yuki,
Hmm.
which
Retired.
causes
That's
Yuki to
sad.
retire. I'm repping my Yuki shirt.
Yes, you and Nicole Piastri both.
Yes, he, he just has always struggled at Monza. I don't know if you remember
Yeah,
last
it's
season, he
sad.
DNF'd on the formation lap. He's just having a
Sad,
hard time
sad,
out here.
sad.
And then, as we mentioned, Daniel then comes in to serve his 5 second penalty. Mechanic touches the front wing,
Mm.
10 second penalty. So,
Ugh.
not the best day for V Carb. And then just the Red Bulls were just struggling. And I feel like, too, I
Yeah.
don't know if you noticed this. I feel like in the past, like last year, even earlier this season, but mostly last year when Max was dominating so much, I just always kind of wanted like a mechanic to screw up a pit stop or like just, but they were always on
Yeah,
it.
they
Like
were
two
so good.
two second pit stop, just everything was so clean. And I feel like now that the car is kind of struggling, it's sort of caused everything else to kind of struggle because now we're seeing like 6 second pit stops. And we're just
Hmm.
seeing a little bit of like the edges are starting to kind of fray. And it's interesting how once one thing kind of starts to go off with a team, it does affect other aspects of the
Oh, yeah.
team.
It's the power of the morale that we were talking about a little bit earlier.
Yes.
When the morale takes a hit, it hits in areas that you would never have expected it to affect.
Yes.
And this all the drama for them leading into the season that was completely off track
Hmm.
has, in my opinion, just sent things derailing ever since then. I mean, no one would think that a court case was going to affect a car's performance. But yet here we are because
Here
we're
we
human
are.
beings. They're human beings that want to believe in their team and want to believe in their leaders. And that foundation's a little shaken.
Definitely. Definitely. So Yeah, I was just very surprised by the lack of performance. It made the race really interesting, but it was just very shocking to see. And then we had what I think ended up obviously deciding the race was this Ferrari strategy to do a
Mm-hmm.
one-stop race. Now, you and I both
Which
know.
wasn't their strategy to begin with.
I know, I
I
know.
don't
I
think
don't think
so.
so. I think they made the late call, but we know we've experienced it as fans. Ferrari does not always make the best strategy calls. They
Hmm.
often do not make the best strategy calls.
To where
And
even Carlos and Charles were both like, "What are you doing?"
right, right, exactly. And so the decision to stay out was I was like, oh, I don't know how this is gonna go. But I actually
Mm,
was like, you know what, this is smart because this either, I mean, it will either work or he will end up where he would have ended up had he done the pit stop. You know what I mean? I kind of
yeah,
felt like it was a risk worth taking for
yeah.
them. And I was just looking at that interval between Charles Leclerc and Oscar
Hmm.
Piastri. Like, I
Hmm.
was like, is he going to be able to make a dent? Is he going to be able to get closer?
Hmm.
And it wasn't enough for
Yeah.
McLaren. They couldn't do it. Were you surprised? Because I felt like I was like, Oscar's going to win this race for a majority of the race. And then it felt like it was really a race won by strategy. And I feel like we haven't had a strategy win like
Hmm.
this in a long
Hmm.
time,
Yeah. Oscar needed to pit 3 to 6 laps
as you said.
earlier than he
Yes.
did in
Yeah.
order for him to have the best shot at catching Charles in that moment, which is proven because he ended up only like what 3.2 seconds behind him by
Something
the
like
end.
that. Yeah.
And I was watching that gap too, like a hawk. I was like, it's 9.3, 9.1. And he was making ground for a while there. And then I think that there's probably communication that happened between him and his engineer that was just like, hey, it's just not realistic to push at this level. You're not going to catch him because the pace at which he was catching him kind of teetered until, and he was still catching him, but he just needed a couple
It
more
wasn't
laps.
enough.
Yeah, to really get him. And I actually thought I was like getting flashbacks to Paul Ricard and flashbacks to some of what had become kind of the classic Charles
Yeah.
mistakes of
Yeah.
what was it, 2022,
Yeah.
2023. And I looked at my husband and I said, "Oh, he's waiting for Charles to spin. He's waiting for Charles to catch the gravel. He's lying in wait for him to do what he does when he has the lead." And I told Charles he didn't do it.
I know.
He stuck it out and he made it all the way to the end. I was like butt clenched until he crossed that finish line because I was just waiting for the radio that was gonna, change the world. But it didn't happen. Thank
I
goodness.
know. I was so happy. I am obviously I'm a huge Charles Leclerc fan. And I think
Hmm.
for him to get his two wins so far, because obviously there's still more racing to happen, but to win in Monaco and to win in Monza as a Monegasque driver
Hmm.
for Ferrari is so cool and so
Hmm.
awesome. And it was just as bummed as I was for Oscar and all that stuff too. I was very happy. And I feel like it's so cool. Hannah and I talked about this last week, I think, too. Like the fact that we go into race weekends now and we don't know who's going to win
Yes.
is so cool. Like, because
Yes.
we haven't had that in a while. And the fact that it
It's so
could be
exciting.
a number of drivers, a number of teams, like you
Hmm.
really just don't know. And I don't know, it just makes the racing so much more interesting.
Hmm. And I think Singapore this year is going to be so exciting because historically Red Bull struggles there anyway. So I
Yep.
feel like we're all coming into it just thinking, okay, maybe not the Red Bull show, but Mercedes has done well in the past, Ferrari's done well in the past, and McLaren's done well in the past. And they're all three on fire right now. So I'm just like licking my chops, getting excited for Singapore.
Cannot wait. Cannot wait. Um, Also just wanted to just quickly shout out
Mhm.
Franco as well. Strong race for
Yes.
Williams. Decent. I mean, we also have been, I don't want to say burned in the past, but like sometimes a Williams in Monza isn't always the best
That's
representation of a
true.
driver's future. Nick
Yeah.
DeVries got a F1 seat because of his
Woof.
Monza debut. No shade to that situation,
Yeah.
but so I'll be curious to see how he does at other tracks. And obviously Baku coming up, Singapore coming up, like tricky tracks if you're
Hmm.
new and very technical. But I think for coming in last minute, having
Hmm.
to basically just keep it clean,
Mm-hmm.
and do well. I thought he did a good job. So
Yeah.
props
Even
to
watching
him.
him in qualifying was very impressive. I felt like he hung in there
Yes,
in every sense of the word, which is all you can ask for a
all you
guy
can
on his first
ask.
weekend in the middle of the season. So,
Completely agree. And then the other thing I wanted to just quickly touch on is that Kevin Magnussen race ban.
oh gosh.
Honestly, kind of iconic. I don't know how you feel about it, but I'm just kind of like, you know what? He's not going to be on the grid next year, but like this is it's kind of funny. Like
It's so
when I saw
Kevin.
that, it just kind of made me laugh,
Did you
honestly.
see his Instagram post about it?
Yes. Yes.
His caption. He was
I
like,
was
"Good news. We made it.
one
Bad
point.
news.
Yeah.
Thing in Singapore." Like,
Yeah, and he because he got the got a 10-second penalty as well during the race for a clash
mm.
with Gasly. And actually Pierre said after the race that he was going to try to like convince the stewards to not give
Aw,
Kevin a race ban because he like didn't feel like it was fair. Obviously, like
sweet Pierre.
that's not gonna make a they're not gonna be like, oh, okay, sure, no
Yeah.
ban for you, Kevin. Like the rules are the rules. But so I think it sounds like Ollie Bierman is going to fill in for K Mag. That hasn't been officially
Okay.
confirmed yet,
That was
but
going to be
that's
my
the
question is like if somebody gets a ban, can they put somebody else in the
yes.
seat?
Yes. So I
Okay.
think that's kind of part of me feels like if a driver gets banned, the team shouldn't be able to put another driver in that seat. It feels like you should
I
have
know.
to drive a driver
I feel like you
down.
shouldn't be allowed to do that.
Yeah, but that is the rule. So it hasn't. I think again, like Ollie has to be approved to be able to race by Ferrari because he's technically their reserve driver, and so. But it sounds like that's going to be the case. That it will be Ollie.
Okay,
So it'll be
hypothetical
fun.
situation then, because that
Yeah.
would mean that this will be the second time Ollie has
Yes.
raced this season. This might be a stupid question, but if he scores points, do they still count towards his individual driver points? Because he scored points in the Ferrari, even though it's in a different
Yes.
car.
I believe so because I remember someone saying that like if with like the Red Bull like back when Alex Albon
Mm-hmm.
changed to Red Bull that like his points just
Stayed.
stuck or like stayed. Yeah, like he could get points from two places. So, yes, I
Ooh.
believe that's the case. Um
Exciting.
yeah, very exciting. So, sad for K-Mag, but
Yeah,
we'll
it
see
is
him
sad.
back in Singapore.
Oh my gosh.
It's gonna be
Honestly,
funny.
he's probably kind of grateful. I mean, as grateful as you can be to have a race ban because Singapore is so hard to prepare for. So now he's going to have a jump on all of the other drivers in
Yes.
prepping for
He
Singapore.
gets a
So,
week off, he can rest, relax.
yes, he go to the
Do
sauna, get ready, you know.
yes,
I
yes.
hope he hangs out with Kimi Räikkönen and they just have the best time.
Yes, I completely agree. Anything else from the race that you wanted to touch on? Any other notable moments or drivers you wanted to
Hmm.
highlight or anything?
Um Honestly, I feel like we have to give Carlos a shout out for
Yes.
defending as well as
Yes.
he did because that's
He
also
did.
what allowed Charles to win.
Yep.
And
Yep.
Max over here defending for no reason other than to just defend.
I know. I know.
And
Max
I
is
loved
having
it when he
himself.
asked his engineer. He was like, "So do you want me to fight this?" And they were like, "Yeah." He was like, "All right."
Max was just not, he just is like not used to this life. You know what
No,
I mean?
no. And also when he was like on the radio and said, "Hey guys, everyone needs to wake up and
Yeah.
help
Yeah.
me."
Yeah.
What do you think they're
Yeah. I know. I
doing?
know.
There were some pretty good radios, I have to say,
There were.
from this
There very
race.
much so were. I know. I know. Yeah, it's going to be so fascinating to see well a how much longer Red Bull is like this, like if they're able to improve their
Mm,
performance, and if they're not able to, how much longer Max is willing to stick around for. Like how much can he
yes.
handle of this current situation? Because I feel like he is, I mean, because he's arguably the best, if not one of the best on the grid, depending on what you who you believe is your goat.
Yes.
Um, he has the luxury of being able to go wherever he wants. People will make way for him. You know,
I was gonna
teams
say,
will
because that's
make
a question of where he
changes.
would go. Yeah.
Right. And so I feel like he doesn't have to he doesn't have to wait around for a team to get good again. He can just go to where
Mm,
the team is already good.
fair.
And so I just think that that will be really interesting to see what just what he decides to do with the rest of his
Mm, mm-hmm,
career.
mm-hmm.
Um, okay, should we get to
Yeah.
some of the listener questions?
Oh yeah,
Um,
one
oh
last
yeah,
little
please,
shout out. I have to
please.
give a
Yes.
shout out to Lewis Hamilton for speaking Italian in the fan zone. I was like, not this man already learning Italian because he's going to Ferrari next year.
Yes,
Love
yes.
that. He
He
knows his
he's
audience.
he does.
So,
He does. He's very good. I feel like Lewis is the best at like always thanking the fans, like
hmm
just kind of I don't know. I feel like he always takes that moment to kind of acknowledge them, which is
yeah.
always
Yeah.
nice.
He's so good at it. So, anyways,
He
let's get to
is.
some questions.
Okay, so the question is I don't know if you saw someone allude to the fact that there might be something in Oscar's contract that prevents him from being referred to as a number two driver or like being deemed the number two driver.
Oh.
And so somebody asked, what's the chances of no number two driver in Oscar's contract? Love that for him, which is interesting.
Yeah. Again, y'all get us in those rooms. We'll find out for you. I
It
swear.
is. It is interesting.
Yeah.
I
I
don't
don't
know.
I don't know. I think that um Mark Webber, who is Oscar's manager, I think Mark
Yeah.
knows what he's doing. And I also think that they are extra super cautious when it comes to contract verbiage in light of the Alpine saga. And so it wouldn't surprise me if something like that was in his contract intentionally to
Well,
avoid putting him in that situation.
I was going to say, and Mark Webber too, he understands a thing or two about being a number
Driver
two
number two.
driver.
Yes.
And so
Yes.
maybe to protect Oscar,
Yeah.
I don't know. Again, I'll be very curious to see what happens going forward, what happens in the future with McLaren and how much longer they can handle this situation before either things bubble to the surface or they have to create clear parameters.
Mm-hmm.
It'll be very fascinating to watch. I'm excited to see how that goes. Okay,
Yeah, me
someone
too.
also said, "Do you think McLaren screwed up their strategy on Sunday?" Because I feel like McLaren didn't really have an I don't feel like they screwed it up. I think they made the right call by pitting the drivers.
Hmm.
They were probably too late with Oscar to
Oscar.
your point, but I don't think they could have done the one stop. Is what
Yeah,
I'm
no,
getting at. Yeah.
I don't think they had the one stop in them with the rate at which they were pushing. I think that they made the right calls for Lando. Unfortunately, Lando lost the lead so early on that then they were
Yeah.
trying to recover, and it was mostly reactive and responsive from Lando at that point. I think for Oscar, they made all the right calls. I don't understand why they waited so long to pit him. That's my only thing. That's the only one where I'm like, I don't know why they waited so long.
Yeah, yeah. I think before I took the risk paid off,
Hmm.
but I yeah, I don't know. Does does Lando have a confidence issue? He seemed so down at quali interviews. What do
I
you
think
think?
Lando is more emotional than any of us give him credit for, which
Yeah.
that could just be my impression of him thus far. I actually felt like coming into this season, especially, he was showing a lot more maturity, which was really lovely to see. And then I feel like some true colors were shown in Hungary that were disappointing. And then I saw somebody communicate that he didn't spray Charles on the podium either
Oh, I
in
see.
Monza.
I missed the podium celebration, so I
Yeah,
can't
I
speak to
didn't see
that.
it myself, but I saw
Okay.
somebody say like Lando didn't spray Charles in the podium, and I'm like, that's just disappointing to me.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't know. Yeah, I'm not sure if I mean again, I didn't see it, so I don't
Yeah.
know. I think Lando is very hard on himself. I think he's extremely hard on himself and I think he's kind of realized I feel like for a lot of these drivers when you come in young and you believe in yourself and you believe in your ability and you also in the back of your mind you see drivers like a Lewis Hamilton or a Max Verstappen
Hmm.
who have these great cars and you see them winning races and you think if I can just get a great car, then I'm
Hmm.
going to do the same thing and I'm going to win championships. And all it's going to take for me to be a world champion is to just have a great car. But then you get the great car and you realize that it takes a lot more than just having a great car to win a championship. And And it's actually very challenging to race when you're at the front and when you're
Hmm.
expected to win and when the pressure is on you and you have a chance at winning a championship. It's not as easy as maybe you would think it would be, um, judging from the outside. And I feel like he's kind of having that moment of recognizing, like, okay, this is challenging, this is hard. And also I think he has in the back of his mind too the numbers or the stats that he's unfortunately gotten, which is like he's only been able to convert, I feel like, one pole position to a
Hmm.
win. And like he's probably thinking of the times where he could have won but he didn't win, and like
Hmm.
that does affect your confidence. He's obviously an incredibly talented driver. He's so fast, he's so capable,
Hmm. Hmm.
but I think those other things kind of start to eat away at you. And I don't know, like, if he uses a sports psychologist, if he has other people that like help him, but I feel like so many athletes do it for other sports, and I'm sure maybe F1 drivers do as well. But like, I do wonder if he would benefit from something like that to just kind of get him in a place where he's a little bit more laser focused on what he has to do and kind of like quieting all the noise in his head, I guess.
Yeah. Well, and if you think about it, his whole F1 career has been about finally getting that first win. And so for so
Yep.
long since he's been behind the wheel of an F1 car, it's just been about getting that first win. And then after he got that first win, I think he looked at himself and was like, okay, I can win in this car. I
Yes.
want to always win in this car. And so then he is harder on himself when he doesn't. And then on to throw it all on top of it, to commend what you said earlier, McLaren are now seeing, and I'm sure Lando's seeing, that championship is in sight for me.
Right. Right.
I can get it in this
Yes.
car.
Yes. And
And
that's a lot of
so
pressure.
the
That's a
stakes
lot
are
of
so much
pressure.
higher for him. Yeah.
Yes. It's like in some ways it's easier to race when you know you're like the third or fourth fastest car, because you know in your
Hmm.
mind you're like, I'm not going, I don't have the car to compete, so it takes some
Hmm.
pressure off of you. And it and I think we've seen it with other drivers in the past too. It's like sometimes a driver performs better when they do have a midfield car than when they have a top car. And like it actually, and then vice versa too, I think. Like it just is interesting how that pressure can improve a driver's performance, but can also really like affect a driver's performance negatively. And
Hmm.
I think, yeah, it's just I think we're in for a very interesting end of the season. Like that's what I have to say. I think it's going to be, and now we have Ferrari also in play for the constructors championship too. Like it really is this
Yeah.
three-way fight, um which will be fun to watch. I mean, again, after last season and just how like sealed up that whole season was, to be able to be in a position where we're like, I don't really know what's going to happen,
Yeah. I
is
love
awesome.
it.
I love
I
it
love
too.
it.
Okay, anything else you wanted to touch on before we wrap up? Any other notable moments? Oh, I was going to ask
Mm.
you your predictions for Baku.
Ooh, I think that we'll see a McLaren win in Baku. I do.
Okay.
I
Okay.
think that it'll be either Lando or Oscar. Obviously, like not so secret that I want it to be Oscar. But would be happy if it was Lando too. Um, I also would love to see Carlos. I feel like these are all my heart choices, not necessarily my head
Listen,
choices.
I
But
I I understand. I go with my heart too often, and it doesn't always make me feel good in the end. Yeah, I think it'll be really interesting to see how, I mean, I know this is a place where Checo has done like well in the past, but
yes.
obviously the Red Bull hasn't been good. So like, will it even matter if he's done well here before, if the car is not good enough?
Yeah.
Like that might be something to kind of watch and see how that shakes out. So I don't know. We're getting to two tracks back to back that are street tracks. It's a different skill set. I think some drivers like do better on these circuits than on like the traditional circuits. So that's gonna be
Mm.
fascinating to see. So I'm excited for it. And then we have a
Who do
month
you
break
think? Yeah,
after.
what's your prediction?
Oh, prediction. I I I think it's going to. I'm gonna guess Oscar is gonna win.
Ooh, I'm gonna text you. If Oscar's leading, I'm gonna text you, be like, we called it, he owes us.
Please do. Though there's a part of me that feels I don't think they'll win necessarily, but I am sort of feeling a Mercedes podium.
Ooh, Ooh, a little yabba dabba do on the podium.
Yeah, yeah,
Okay.
or
Or Lewis
maybe
or
Lewis
Hammer Time. I
Hamilton.
mean, that would be cool too.
That would be
But
my
let's be real. I
preference.
feel like George is gonna do it.
But and I guess my other prediction is going to be I think somebody outside of the top four teams is going to have a really good race. Like maybe
Oh.
a top six finish. That's my other prediction. Like I think we might get like an outlier performance.
Like an Alonzo
And
up there or something. Yeah,
yeah, something like that's just kind of like, oh, I'm surprised that that person finished where they did.
I
I know
like
that's
it.
kind of vague, but that's my prediction for
Hey,
that.
keep it vague and then you're usually right.
Okay, well, thank you so much for being here. Appreciate you so much. Where can everybody find you, listen to you? I know you have a lot of things going on, so please share all the things with everybody.
Yeah, well, first of all, thank you so much for having me. This has been so much fun. I love you guys so much. And so
We love you.
it's always fun to talk with other women about
It's
Formula
the
1
best. I agree.
and just gab all the things. And so you guys can find me on Instagram, TikTok. I have a Patreon that's all Caroline's Corner. The rebrand to Caroline's Corner. If you want to send me a DM and ask if I've like changed it because of the F1 rules, you can. I'll tell you right now, no, that's not why we changed it. We just changed it because I do more like general sports. But
Love
I
it.
love Formula One. Formula One will always be like a core part of what I do. But yeah, on the socials.
Love it. When do your episodes come out? Do you have like
They usually come out
dates?
on Mondays. So
Mondays. Perfect.
yes,
Okay.
they
So
come out
after
on
you
Mondays.
listen to, I mean, I know that this comes out on Tuesday for people, but typically we come out Monday. So after you listen to this, you listen to Caroline.
Caroline's
Um,
Corner. Woo!
love it. Love it. Okay. So we end our show by saying enchanté. So I
Mm.
would love if you could end our show for us by giving us an enchanté.
Thank you guys so much for listening. Enchanté.